Hi, this is Pierre Delacote working at Planet Technologies. I work a lot on Teams, Microsoft Teams, and often people think that deploying Teams is pretty easy, which is probably the case. Then they think that using Teams meetings is pretty easy, which most of the time is the case. And then Teams for collaboration, putting in place Teams with channels is a bit more complicated, so it needs governance and next time. And people need to change the way they're functioning, change their workflow, their day-to-day workflow around communication, which is true too. But it's not just a matter of technology, how to use technology, do you need just to understand the technology to leverage it? I really believe it's a matter of transforming the way you're working, so a little bit changing behaviors, changing habits, and it's really key to understand what is your culture and where you really want to go in the new way of working. I believe that a new way of working that will work and that works where I've seen it deployed is adopting some postures in terms of transparency, in terms of making people feel safe when they collaborate, in terms of embracing vulnerability when people are a little bit scared to expose themselves when they collaborating, especially with tools. People don't have the same experience, they don't have the same maturity in using tools, and so sometimes they feel scared to do something wrong with the tools. That's one thing, not being mature, understanding how to use the tools correctly, but also they can be scared of asking a question because they think it's a dumb question. It's not. And because when you don't have a conversation, an open conversation with respect and trust, then you assume things. You assume that the person you're collaborating with thinks this or that. And most of the time people are wrong because they're assuming what other people are thinking. So really it's key when you're using Teams to have some sort of strategy, especially for, let's say, managers or champions team, to role model, to show the way, to lead the way, how to really collaborate in that kind of environment, which is really an environment that is not self-centric like Outlook is. It's really team-centric. So I have a few recommendations that I share usually with my customers around how to role model when you're using Teams. First, let's talk about email. When you see, for example, and if you want to switch from a self-centric Outlook culture to a team-centric Teams culture, you really need to stop using email as much as you can. So I personally don't use email very often. My inbox is 0 unread email because first I don't receive a lot of email because I don't send a lot of email. And so I don't have a lot of email to manage. And I use Teams heavily to communicate with my peers, my manager, even with customers sometimes. So first, try not to use email. And second, be part of the education. When you see people starting to communicate within emails with a thread of 10, 11, 100 emails, you know, that crazy things. If you see that happening, educate people. And a good way to educate people is to send their email to a team channel if the subject is about a project, for example, or if it's just an email back and forth between you and a person or a group of person, you can do the same thing with the chat. So educate people, stop the thread, and tell them that you're going to keep this conversation in Teams. Oh, that's a first way, and you need to show that you're incarnate this change. So you regularly, if you are on the edge to send an email, think twice. Will it be more appropriate to send it in Teams or in a chat? Think about it. Sometimes you can't because there's no Teams, it's not a chat. There's always exceptions, but try to make your internal email exceptions. So that's the first advice. Second advice is you will see it, especially at the beginning, and maybe sometimes even after a while, some people are not really contributing to team. They're not sharing anything. They're not asking questions unless they're forced, and you don't want to do that. So take some time with them, tell them what are your best practices, what you've seen working well, and explain that, try to understand where the pain is. Because sometimes the pain is because people are scared, either because they don't understand how to use the technology or they don't even understand the technology, the concept, or sometimes they're scared to express themselves so everybody will see what they're saying. So the principle of Teams is transparency. All the team members have the same permission and they see the same thing. So except if you have a private channel, but in general, that's the case. So to create engagement, you need to encourage people to share. And a good way to do that is to ask them questions. And if you don't see any answer, ask directly, mentioning the people or the team some questions that are engaging, so they can start to, if they don't feel comfortable using the tool, they can start to see how to use the tool. So really ask questions. Sometimes you can poll about a topic, a common topic, and that polls are a quick poll with a few questions, a few answers. So you can have a direct interaction with people and direct engagement. Also, if you want, and it's a common thing with enterprise social network or social network, when you add a content in Teams which has a visual, it brings more, there's more reach, people see it more easily. So try to add some visual sometime to be sure that people are going to see the message. But most importantly, you need to mention people if you want them to see, because after a while, you're part of a lot of teams and you cannot follow up on every subject. So on the other side, when you're posting a message, if you want to reach specific people, mention them. So mention to be sure that people are going to read what you're posting, is the best practice. And on the other side, if you're posting something and if you're mentioning somebody or a few people, the convention is for the people who are going to read the message is to like the message, not to say they like what you said, but to say I read it. So once again, it's a way to engage more easily. So as a champion, as a manager, when you see somebody posting something, even if they don't mention you, try to like the message, and even you can comment the message, you can answer the message, you can reply to the message if you can bring value. Also a good way to engage when, for example, somebody has a question and I don't know, you're the manager of this person and you don't have the answer, but you think that you might know somebody who can contribute to that in the team. You can mention as a reply, you can mention the person that you think that could be a good help. Another thing to understand in teams, and also in order to reassure people who can feel overwhelmed with all you can do in teams, you need to make people feel that the learning teams is a purposeful thing. It's not just you have one tool and you're learning it all. It's not like that. You can know it all. So you need to from time to time share some tips and tricks because Teams is full of little features. I'm really knowledgeable, I think, on Teams, and I still learn things either because I didn't know them or because I didn't see the use of the feature, and one day I see it in a use case, I understand the benefit, or because it's a new feature. It's with the cloud, you always have a new feature, especially in Teams, you have a lot of new features coming almost every week. So make people understand the need to learn at their own pace. There are several ways to learn. If you have internal poll with learning content, that can be helpful. If not, you can learn from following people on YouTube or other media, and you can learn from other people. So a good way to learn is to ask for help, but not assistance. To me, it's a huge difference. When you ask people for help, the good way to help, usually the good way to help people is to give them the solution while you're educating them, not just deliver a solution and they forget about how you delivered it. They need to understand for them to learn and to be able to repeat what you've done. They need to understand the process, and they need to, that's how we learn. It's basically we're learning more by doing than listening an answer. Another part of enabling the adoption of Teams and the engagement in Teams and understand where Teams is beneficial is around the concept of meetings. Meetings are a place to collaborate. When I interview people around collaboration, I always spend some time discussing about meetings. How do they attend meetings? Do they have too many meetings? Are they efficient? Are they too long? What is missing and so on? And everybody, I don't know anybody who didn't complain about meetings. So knowing that meetings are a pain, the people should do something about it. But the problem with the meeting, just like with collaboration, is you're not the only one to decide. So once again, a good governance with meetings, a best practice is really to engage a discussion before the meetings to make the meetings more efficient, shorter, and sometimes you won't have the need to have this meeting. So in real life, it's hard to, if you have a meeting with 8 people, to call the 8 people and discuss about one thing prior to the meeting. But with Teams, you have a channel, you discuss in the channel about the meeting prior to the meeting, or even in the meeting chat, you can do that prior to the meeting. And you can share documents that you can present. People can ask questions back and forth at their own pace when they're free, when they're available. So a good practice is first to send the agenda for sure, but even when you send the agenda, you start to say, let's discuss that agenda, or let's discuss what we're gonna discuss during the meeting in the channel. So that's a really good practice. During the meeting, the good practice is, of course, to turn on the camera if possible, because it's more engaging. It's also to raise hands if you have too many people, to mute yourself if you're not speaking. Another advice I give, especially for managers, I tell them it's always better to speak last, because everybody can engage and discuss about the topic of the meeting. And as a manager, you give more credit to everybody if you don't start giving your opinion. If you let other people around the table to discuss first, and maybe you can wrap things up, or you can even give your opinion if you have to make a decision, if there's no agreement, for example. But it's a good practice is to make people talk first, and then as a manager you can talk last. So that's during the meeting, some best practice during the meeting. If possible, make it short, and try to start the meeting with a topic, a personal topic, not related to the meeting if it's possible. Obviously, if there are a lot of people, you cannot do that, but make it feel safe, engaging, sometimes fun. It's really important for people to feel safe in a collaborative environment. They can feel safe when they're attending a meeting, and they need to also to feel safe when they're collaborating and expressing ideas in the Teams channel, for example. So that's for the meetings. During the meetings, sometimes you can also, and often you are gonna still discuss topics that you addressed during the meeting after the meeting. A good practice is to record the meeting, so people who didn't have the chance to attend the meeting for whatever reason, they can catch up on the meeting and then ask questions in the channel after the meeting. That way you will see a dramatic change in the way you're holding meetings, and you won't have to have thousands of meetings about subject that don't require meeting, or you're feeling you're losing your time. And it's really, I think it's a massive loss of time for everybody, for most of the customer I've been working for. So when you're engaging in a discussion, in conversation, in teams, in the channel, really the key thing is not politeness, just like in email where you start to say hello and with regards, you don't do that in a conversation because you will have to say hello 25 times in a day to the same group of people, which has nonsense, not any sense. So, but respect is really key. So when people are asking a question or asking for help, you need to respect them. And I also acknowledge that you read what they said. So it's really about respect, and so people can feel safe and they will engage more after. If you don't do that, they will post maybe 1 or 2 times, and then after they will close their communication, and you won't engage. And if you don't engage it's a conversation. Collaboration is conversational. It's key to understand that. If you don't have this conversation, if some members of the team are not conversational, you're not collaborative. You're maybe a little bit collaborative in between a few people, but in general, you're not collaborative. So that's the difficult part, and it's really a challenge because people are different, and people sometimes are reacting in different ways that you're expecting. But keep trying to engage with people with being really respectful, caring. So they will see that you're genuine, and when you're genuine in general, people have gratitude for that, especially when you help them. So another thing is when you see questions that are out of scope, try to help. As I said, by connecting with other people, stuff like that. Last advice on how to make teams more successful in terms of adoption. I will recommend you to make things exclusive to teams, especially at the beginning where it's difficult to onboard people to get out of Outlook and come into Teams. Make some communication exclusive to Teams, so the people are going to miss it. And maybe you don't exclude them because they have access to the team. You exclude their behavior, which is I expect everything in my inbox, which is not a good practice. So sharing information in Teams, make it exclusive to Teams, and you will see people will understand. It's just like the bird curve. You will start with 15% of the Teams member who are gonna work this way, and then after a while you will onboard the early followers, and then the late followers will come. So that was some advice around how to be a role model in Teams. There are many other ways to role model, but here are my ways, my advice I can give that I've seen working. It's my final comment. It takes time. So you need to be patient. You don't be desperate because after a few weeks people are not engaging the way you want. You can have a Teams fatigue because of that, especially if you want people to collaborate in Teams and you don't see them collaborating. You can feel frustrated and have some fatigue around that. But if you're consistent, you will see the more people will follow your steps, the more engaging the conversation will be and the more positive the output will be. So keep faith in team and adopt behaviors and be the change you wish to see in the world. That's how we change the world.